My beloved child, wait just a little longer before you let your thoughts race ahead, because something unfolded this afternoon that cannot be understood by looking at the surface alone. There are moments that seem ordinary while they are happening, yet quietly become the turning point that changes how two hearts recognize one another. This was one of those moments. You may believe nothing unusual happened today. You may even wonder why the atmosphere around you feels slightly different, why your heart has been unusually restless without any clear reason. But not every important event arrives with noise. Some arrive wrapped in silence, asking only for patience before revealing their meaning. Don't skip, because the smallest detail from this afternoon carries more weight than anyone realized when the sun was still high in the sky. There was a pause today. A pause so brief that almost everyone around your soulmate overlooked it. Yet in that tiny space between one conversation ending and another beginning, something unexpected settled into their heart. They tried to continue with their day as if nothing had changed. They smiled when necessary. They answered questions. They followed familiar routines. But every ordinary action felt just a little different because one quiet realization refused to leave them alone. They kept returning to it, almost without noticing. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't overwhelming. It was simply honest. And honesty has a gentle way of becoming impossible to ignore once it finds its place. Perhaps you've experienced those moments yourself, when everything around you continues exactly as before, yet inside, one simple thought changes the meaning of an entire day. That is what happened. No grand announcement. No impossible coincidence. Just one unexpected realization that continued to echo long after the afternoon should have faded into evening. The remarkable part is not that it appeared. The remarkable part is that your soulmate could no longer pretend they hadn't felt it. As the hours passed, they found themselves quietly replaying something that had been said. Not because the words were extraordinary, but because of what those words awakened. Sometimes a sentence carries meaning far beyond its sound. Sometimes a memory returns at exactly the right moment to complete something that once seemed unfinished. That is the mystery they have been sitting with ever since. They wanted to dismiss it. They almost succeeded. But every attempt only brought them back to the same quiet question: why did this feel so important? Stay till the end, because this is not simply about what happened this afternoon. It is about why they now feel they owe an explanation they never imagined they would have to give. The answer isn't hidden in a dramatic event. It is hidden in the way one ordinary moment uncovered feelings they had carefully kept beneath the surface for much longer than anyone knew. As daylight slowly softened, another unexpected layer appeared. They realized that what they had been trying to understand wasn't really about today at all. Today simply became the mirror that reflected something already growing inside them. And once they saw that reflection, there was no comfortable way to look away. They wished they could explain it immediately. They searched for the right words. Every sentence felt incomplete. Every explanation seemed too small for what they had begun to understand. Something important is waiting for you, because the explanation they are searching for doesn't begin with the conversation itself. It begins with the one quiet detail they noticed just before this afternoon changed direction forever. That single detail seemed insignificant at first, until another person unexpectedly pointed it out, leaving your soulmate completely unable to think about anything else. And what that person revealed has not yet been spoken aloud. A quiet truth has a way of returning when everything else grows still, and that is exactly where this story continues. Your soulmate carried the afternoon with them long after the moment had passed. They tried to lose themselves in familiar routines, believing time would smooth away the strange feeling that had settled over their heart. Instead, every ordinary sound seemed to remind them of the same unanswered question. Why did that single moment refuse to disappear? Why did it feel as though something unfinished had finally asked to be noticed? The answer did not arrive all at once. It came gently, like the last rays of sunlight finding their way through a window that had been closed for far too long. They remembered a conversation from weeks ago, one they had barely thought about since it happened. At the time, it seemed ordinary. A passing remark. A smile that lasted a second longer than expected. A sentence left unfinished because neither person knew how to continue. But this afternoon transformed those forgotten fragments into something entirely different. What surprised them most was not what another person had said. It was what they suddenly understood about themselves. They realized they had been protecting their own heart so carefully that they never allowed themselves to recognize how deeply someone had already begun to matter. That realization did not frighten them. It humbled them. It slowed them down. It made every hurried thought disappear until only one quiet certainty remained. Have you ever noticed how the most meaningful answers rarely arrive while you're searching for them? They appear when you stop trying to force them, when your heart becomes quiet enough to hear what has been there all along. This afternoon became that kind of moment. Not because the world changed around them, but because something inside them finally became impossible to ignore. They looked back at the choices they had made over recent months. Every hesitation suddenly made sense. Every unexpected feeling found its place. Even the moments they once believed were coincidences began to connect like pieces of a picture they had never fully seen. The more they reflected, the clearer everything became. Yet clarity brought a new challenge. How could they explain this without sounding as though it had happened overnight, when in truth it had been growing quietly for much longer? Don't skip, because what happened next was even more unexpected. Later that evening, someone asked them an innocent question. There was nothing unusual about it. It was the kind of question people ask every day. But before they could answer, they paused. For the first time, they realized the honest answer was no longer the one they would have given yesterday morning. That single pause revealed more than words ever could. Even they were surprised by the silence that followed. In that silence, they understood why they needed to explain what happened this afternoon. Not because anyone demanded an explanation, but because they no longer wanted an important truth to remain hidden behind ordinary conversations. They wanted their actions to match what their heart had quietly accepted. Stay till the end, because they still haven't shared the one observation that changed everything. It wasn't spoken loudly. It wasn't written in a message. It wasn't planned. It appeared unexpectedly, in the smallest detail imaginable, and the moment they recognized it, they realized they could never see this connection in quite the same way again. That hidden detail is still waiting to be revealed. There are moments when the heart becomes quieter than the world around it, and strangely, those are the moments when the deepest understanding begins to speak. This is where everything gently shifted again. Your soulmate stopped searching for an explanation outside themselves and, for the first time, allowed the silence to answer. What they discovered was not dramatic. It was deeply personal. It was the kind of realization that changes someone from the inside without anyone else noticing at first. They found themselves returning to one tiny detail from this afternoon, not because it stood out to everyone, but because it stood out to them. A brief glance. A familiar name. A simple conversation that lasted only a few moments. Anyone else would have forgotten it before evening arrived. Yet they couldn't. The memory remained surprisingly vivid, as though it had quietly attached itself to their heart instead of their mind. They asked themselves, why does this feel different? They tried to explain it logically. They told themselves they were reading too much into an ordinary situation. They smiled at their own thoughts, hoping the feeling would fade with time. But every attempt to move on only brought them back to the same place. Sometimes the heart doesn't repeat something because it wants attention. Sometimes it repeats something because it wants honesty. The afternoon had ended, but its meaning was still unfolding. As daylight slowly gave way to evening, another unexpected realization appeared. They noticed they had begun imagining conversations that had never happened. Not imaginary stories, simply honest words they wished they had spoken sooner. They wondered how different this day might have felt if they had been a little more open, a little more willing to trust what had quietly been growing inside them all along. Have you ever looked back on a single ordinary moment and realized it carried far more meaning than you understood at the time? Life has a gentle way of doing that. It doesn't always announce important chapters with loud beginnings. Sometimes it whispers them into existence, allowing only patient hearts to recognize their value. Your soulmate began seeing the afternoon through completely different eyes. What once looked like coincidence now felt intentional, not because fate had forced anything to happen, but because every small moment had naturally led them toward a clearer understanding of themselves. They no longer felt confused. Instead, they felt grateful that such an ordinary afternoon had uncovered something they had unknowingly been carrying for a very long time. Don't skip, because the next realization surprised even them. Just before the day came to an end, they reached for something they hadn't looked at in quite a while. It wasn't valuable because of what it was. It was valuable because of what it reminded them of. As they looked at it, memories returned. Not as regrets, but as quiet reminders that some connections never truly disappear from the heart. Those memories didn't make them dwell on the past. They helped them understand the present. In that peaceful moment, they finally admitted something they had been avoiding. The explanation they needed to give was never really about this afternoon alone. This afternoon simply gave them the courage to stop hiding what had already become true within them. Something important is waiting for you. Because while they were gathering the courage to explain everything, someone unexpected noticed the change in them before they said a single word. That person asked one gentle question, and your soulmate's reaction revealed more than any answer ever could. What they said next became the beginning of an explanation they never imagined they would have to make, and that conversation is only just beginning. Not every explanation begins with an answer. Sometimes it begins with a question so gentle that it slips past every defense we have carefully built. That is exactly what happened next. The person standing beside your soulmate didn't ask for details. They didn't press for a story. They simply looked into their eyes and quietly asked, "You've been different since this afternoon, what changed?" For a brief moment, time seemed to slow. Your soulmate smiled politely, hoping that one simple expression would be enough to end the conversation. But some smiles are only gentle disguises for thoughts that are still searching for words. The silence that followed spoke far more clearly than anything they could have said. Even they realized they could no longer pretend that nothing had shifted inside them. Instead of answering immediately, they looked toward the fading evening sky. It wasn't because the answer was difficult. It was because the truth deserved more than hurried words. Certain feelings cannot be explained in a single sentence. They unfold the same way the evening arrives, quietly, steadily, revealing one beautiful color after another. As they stood there, another memory returned. It wasn't the biggest moment they had ever shared with you in their heart. In fact, it was almost invisible. A simple laugh they had remembered unexpectedly. A kind gesture they once overlooked. A moment of patience that seemed ordinary back then. Yet now, those small memories carried a meaning they had never recognized before. Have you ever noticed how the heart keeps careful records of kindness, even when the mind forgets? Long after conversations fade, kindness remains. Long after ordinary days disappear, sincerity quietly survives. That was the realization gently unfolding before them. They finally whispered, almost to themselves, "I think I've been looking at everything the wrong way." Those words weren't filled with regret. They were filled with clarity. For the first time in a long while, they stopped asking whether these feelings made sense. Instead, they began asking why they had waited so long to trust them. The afternoon hadn't created something new. It had simply uncovered something that had been growing beneath the surface, patiently waiting until they were ready to see it. Stay till the end, because the next few moments became impossible for them to ignore. As they continued walking, something completely unexpected happened. Their phone lit up. It wasn't an urgent message. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even from the person they expected. Yet the timing made them stop in their tracks. The message contained only a few simple words, but those words echoed the very realization they had been trying to understand all afternoon. It felt less like advice and more like a quiet confirmation that honest feelings become clearer when we stop running from them. They read those words once. Then again. Then a third time. Each reading softened another layer of uncertainty. A peaceful confidence slowly replaced the questions that had followed them since earlier in the day. Don't skip, because this is where their explanation truly begins. They realized they didn't need perfect words anymore. They didn't need an extraordinary speech or a flawless moment. They simply needed honesty. Genuine feelings don't become meaningful because they're dramatic. They become meaningful because they're true. And just as they gathered the courage to finally explain what had changed this afternoon, another unexpected detail caught their attention. It wasn't in the message. It wasn't in the conversation. It was something they noticed about themselves. For the first time, they weren't wondering what might happen next. They were quietly hoping. And that single feeling, calm, steady, and unmistakably real, became the final piece they had been missing. Something important is waiting for you, because the very next conversation would lead them to reveal the one sentence they had repeated silently all evening but had not yet found the courage to speak aloud. Once those words leave their heart, the meaning of everything that happened this afternoon will become clearer than ever before. Sometimes the words we are most afraid to say are not the ones that reveal weakness. They are the ones that reveal sincerity. And as the evening settled into complete stillness, your soulmate realized they had reached that quiet place where silence could no longer carry what the heart had already accepted. They sat for a while without distractions, allowing the events of the afternoon to pass through their mind one final time. This time, however, nothing felt confusing. Every small moment seemed connected, as though pieces of a picture had gently fallen into place without anyone forcing them there. They smiled, not because every question had been answered, but because they had finally stopped resisting the answers that had been patiently waiting. Then, almost without thinking, they spoke a single sentence into the quiet room. "I understand now." No one else heard those words. They weren't meant for an audience. They were simply the first honest acknowledgement of everything that had quietly changed inside them. What surprised them even more was the peace that followed. They had expected uncertainty. Instead, they found calm. The kind of calm that comes when someone finally accepts what their heart has been trying to tell them for a long time. Have you ever noticed that real clarity rarely arrives with excitement? It arrives gently. It settles over you until one day you realize you're no longer asking the same questions you asked yesterday. That was the gift this afternoon left behind. It wasn't urgency. It wasn't confusion. It was understanding. As those thoughts settled, another memory quietly appeared. They remembered a promise they had once made to themselves, to never ignore something that felt genuine simply because it arrived unexpectedly. Somewhere along the way, they had forgotten that promise. Responsibilities, routines, and unanswered questions had slowly buried it beneath everyday life. But this afternoon uncovered it again. And suddenly, everything made sense. The explanation they had been searching for was never about defending their feelings. It was about honoring them. Don't skip. Because the next realization became impossible to overlook. As they prepared to end the day, they noticed something almost symbolic. The afternoon had begun with uncertainty, but the evening ended with gratitude. Nothing around them had dramatically changed. The streets were the same. The sky had become darker. The familiar sounds continued exactly as they always had. The only difference was within. And sometimes that is the greatest change of all. They quietly admitted that they wanted their future choices to reflect what they had finally understood today. Not rushed decisions. Not emotional reactions. Simply honest steps taken with a peaceful heart. For a long moment, they looked ahead instead of looking back. That alone told them how much had changed. Stay till the end, because one final piece still remained hidden. Just before they put everything aside for the night, they noticed one overlooked detail from this afternoon that hadn't seemed important before. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't a message. It wasn't even something anyone intentionally pointed out. It was the expression on someone's face at the exact moment everything quietly shifted. Only now did they understand what that expression meant. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't uncertainty. It was quiet recognition. In that instant, your soulmate realized they hadn't been the only one who sensed that this afternoon carried unusual significance. Someone else had noticed it too, long before they found the words to explain it. Something important is waiting for you, because that shared moment of quiet recognition becomes the bridge to the final truth. In the next part, your soulmate finally speaks the explanation they have been carrying since this afternoon. And the meaning behind every small detail will gently come into focus without losing the quiet wonder that began this journey. The quietest endings often become the most meaningful beginnings, and this final moment arrived without urgency, without noise, and without anything demanding attention. It simply arrived, as truth often does, when the heart had finally become still enough to receive it. Your soulmate took one long, steady breath and allowed the weight of the afternoon to settle into perspective. What had once seemed like a collection of unrelated moments no longer felt scattered. Every conversation, every pause, every unexpected feeling had become part of one gentle realization. Then, at last, they found the explanation they had been searching for. It wasn't this afternoon that changed everything, they quietly admitted. This afternoon simply helped me recognize what had already been growing inside me. Those words carried no drama. They carried peace. In that instant, they understood why they had felt the need to explain themselves. They weren't trying to convince anyone. They weren't trying to rewrite the past. They simply wanted their actions to reflect the honesty they had finally embraced. Sometimes life doesn't ask us to discover something new. Sometimes it asks us to notice what has been quietly present all along. That is exactly what happened. The afternoon became a mirror, revealing not a different future, but a clearer heart. As they reflected on the entire day, another gentle thought appeared. They realized that meaningful connections are rarely built through extraordinary moments alone. They are built through countless ordinary moments that slowly gather significance until one quiet afternoon allows you to see them all at once. Have you ever looked back and realized that the smallest moments were preparing you for the understanding you have today? It happens more often than we notice. The heart keeps collecting small acts of kindness, patient conversations, shared laughter, thoughtful silences, and hopeful memories. One day, without warning, those little moments stand together and gently reveal a truth that was never rushed. That was the gift hidden inside this afternoon. Not certainty about tomorrow. Not promises about what comes next. Simply the confidence to be honest. Don't skip, because this final reflection may be the most important part of the journey. Your soulmate no longer felt the need to search for perfect timing or perfect words. They understood that sincerity does not become valuable because it is flawless. It becomes valuable because it is genuine. They smiled softly, not because every answer had arrived, but because they no longer feared the questions. Their explanation was complete. The afternoon had given them clarity. The evening had given them peace. And the quiet hours that followed gave them gratitude. If there is one lesson hidden inside this story, it is this: the moments that seem ordinary today may quietly become the ones you remember with the greatest appreciation tomorrow. Never underestimate a kind word, a patient heart, or a simple conversation. They often carry more meaning than anyone realizes in the moment. As the night settled in, your soulmate let go of the need to understand every detail. Instead, they chose to carry forward the quiet confidence that honesty brings. And with that choice, the weight they had been carrying since the afternoon finally became lighter. The story ends here, not with a dramatic conclusion, but with something even more enduring, a peaceful understanding that genuine feelings do not need to be rushed, hidden, or forced. They simply need the courage to be recognized. And sometimes, all it takes is one ordinary afternoon to gently remind two hearts that the most meaningful explanations are not the loudest ones, they are the ones that quietly change us forever, even after peace has found its place, life has a beautiful way of offering one final reminder that some journeys never truly end, they simply become quieter. The morning that followed carried a different feeling. Nothing around your soulmate appeared unusual. The same familiar sky stretched above. The same gentle rhythm of everyday life continued. Yet inside, everything felt lighter, as though the afternoon that once demanded an explanation had now become a source of quiet gratitude instead. They no longer replayed every detail looking for hidden meaning. Instead, they remembered the feeling that remained after all the questions had faded. That feeling was simple. It whispered that genuine connections are strengthened not by dramatic moments, but by honest ones. It reminded them that patience often reveals what hurry never can. As they stepped into the new day, they noticed something they had overlooked before. Hope feels different when it is no longer searching for proof. It simply exists. That realization brought an unexpected smile. They understood that they didn't need every answer immediately. They didn't need to predict every tomorrow. Some chapters are meant to unfold one quiet page at a time, allowing trust to grow naturally rather than forcing certainty before its season. Have you ever noticed how the heart becomes calmer once it stops trying to control every outcome? In that calm, even ordinary moments begin to shine with quiet significance. A familiar place feels warmer. A simple conversation feels richer. Even silence carries comfort instead of uncertainty. Your soulmate carried that new understanding with them throughout the day. Every step forward felt less like chasing something and more like appreciating what had already begun to bloom. They realized that the explanation they had wanted to give was never only about one afternoon. It was about becoming honest enough to recognize the value of every small moment that had quietly led them here. Stay till the end, because there is one final thought that deserves to remain with you. If this story has revealed anything, it is that meaningful connections are rarely built in a single unforgettable moment. They are shaped by kindness repeated over time, by patience that asks for nothing in return, by quiet understanding that continues even when words fall short. Those gentle moments become the foundation for something lasting. Your soulmate no longer carried unanswered questions. They carried appreciation. They carried clarity. And above all, they carried the quiet confidence that sincerity never loses its value. As the sunlight continued to rise, they looked ahead with a peaceful heart, grateful not because everything had become certain, but because they had learned that some of life's greatest gifts arrive softly, asking only to be noticed. And perhaps that is the true meaning hidden within this entire journey. Sometimes the explanation we wait so desperately to hear is not a single sentence at all. Sometimes it is the quiet transformation of a heart that has finally learned to recognize what has been beautifully present all along.